Good afternoon. I'll say it one more time. Good afternoon. Hey, thank you very much. I feel like I'm in Chautauqua now. Thank you very much for being here. I'm acutely aware that in the near future, there's another event that many of you will want to attend. So we appreciate your being here. We always count it as good attendance if we break into double digits. And we've done that legally. Good. My name is Greg Zone, and I represent the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. We are a volunteer organization whose mission is to promote writers and writing on the institution grounds, and we hope beyond by both supporting and supplementing the activities of the Chautauqua Writers Center. We sponsor several weekly events during the season. Sundays at 5 o'clock in the Pros Room on the second floor of this building, writers and listeners 18 years old and above are invited to participate in an open mic session. Each reader gets between 3 and 5 minutes, depending on how many people show up. That was a teaser, though, because we've had our last open mic of the season. Okay? But remember it for next year, please. On Wednesdays at 1:15 in the ballroom, also on the second floor of this building, we offer an informal critique session. Writers are invited to bring in 10 copies of one single-spaced page of their prose or poetry. That's 12-point font, not 6-point font, please. For feedback guided by a published writer, usually yours truly. On Thursdays from 12 to 1, we have launched a new series of locals at the library. Each week, 2 or 3 Chautauqua authors will be available to sell and sign their works. This week, Dr. Janet Crosier will be doing a repeat appearance. She's reading today and will be available on Thursday with Weymouth House, historical fiction. Nick Smith, who has written, I'm smiling, this is interesting to me, Milk Treading, which is a cat noir mystery novel. Who also writes poetry. And Kira Thompson, A Time to Wander, historical fiction. And the final sort of weekly event we have is the Tuesday Authors Hour. And this is Tuesday, so this must be Authors Hour. 3 Chautauqua writers will present their work. After the first reader, I will tell you about our special annual events. 2 of the authors at least will have books for sale afterwards, and we should have time for at least a brief Q&A. So if any questions arise in your mind, try to keep hold of them, write them down, whatever. Our first reader, Dr. Janet Crosier, has a PhD from Capella University, focusing on self-reflective learning, as seen in the writings of Emily Bronte. She has presented research on Emily Bronte for Oxford University and at several academic conferences. She is English professor in Western Massachusetts. Her first book, Shadows in the Heat, was published in 2023, and her second novel, Weymouth House, in August 2025. She's currently working on a novel that takes place at a fictional state institution for the feeble-minded, as they were once called. That is not Chautauqua Institution. Okay. Great. Okay. Dr. Crosier.
Thank you so much. Try to be in the mic here. Okay. Weymouth House is set in the latter half of the 19th century in England, south of London, a few hours drive by horse and buggy. The specific year and exact location are not important. Weymouth House is also the name of an old family estate owned by a solicitor named James Kent. He's a young gentleman with a very young daughter to raise on his own. His life undergoes great changes with Rose and her daughter Rosalie come to work and live at Weymouth House. Rose and Rosalie will also never be the same. Weymouth House is a simple story of love, family, loss, and loyalty. I'm going to read you a little bit of chapter 1, just to set the stage, and then flip over to a piece in chapter 4. Chapter 1. I came to live and work at Weymouth House when I was little more than 9 years old. Such may sound strange to many, but my mother had been hired as a housekeeper, and living quarters, as well as a position for me, were part of the arrangement. I fear I'm getting ahead of myself, so let me begin a few years earlier, before the start of my new life. My mother's name is Rose. She met and married my father when she was just 17 years of age. She gave birth to me 1 year later when only 18. I'm called Rosalie. My father died when I was still a baby, so I do not remember him, but I'm led to believe he was a kind yet strong man. He died from consumption while a young soldier under the command of a kind leader called Colonel Philip Wright. The colonel saw the pain in my mother's eyes when he told her my father had passed after several months of delirium and fits of coughing. She never got to say goodbye, as his body had been disposed of by the army hospital in hopes of keeping the illness from spreading throughout the troops. Her grief ran deep, but she would not let it ruin her, as she had me to care for. Our home had been in the lodging provided by the British Army, as my father had been in the military service for the required number of years for marrying, and his family living with him was one of the privileges allowed. Once my mother was no longer the wife of the soldier, she no longer had a place to live among the soldiers and their wives. Having to leave her few friends deepened her great sorrow. Now all on her own was a young mother with a child not yet out of diapers. Oops. Wright took pity on my grieving mother and offered her a position at his country home with a place to live as well. He had little need of a female housemaid, because a young man named Brisbane cared for the inside of his estate, and another servant called Abel took care of the grounds, and served as personal assistant to the colonel as well. Colonel Wright spoke often to my mother of a young solicitor who lived next door in an estate just beyond the woods. His name was Sir James Kent, and he had been legal advisor to the colonel for the past 5 years. A few years ago, a baby girl was born to Mr. Kent in the wee hours of the morning, one early spring day. The frost had not yet left the ground, and an eerie mist began to rise with the unusual warmth of the dawn, as its first rays of morning sun peeked over the still brown moors of the countryside. The small baby's first cries echoed throughout the room as her father's tears streamed joyously down his face. To Rachel Kent, her daughter would be called Dorothea, the gift of God. To her young husband, the baby girl will be known as Thea, his Thea. And we've already mentioned that he's raising her on his own, so obviously the mother has passed. So now skipping to part of chapter 4, which I hope you won't mind what I'm doing. In the height of the summer, when Thea was nearly 8 years old, there was a historical thunderstorm. It lasted for days with pelting rain and hailstorms, kind of like we've had all this week. At first, the rain was a mere inconvenience, as activities were limited to indoors. I distracted Thea with games of hide and seek and storybooks. Sometimes we played piano and pretended to hold concerts. Mama even taught Thea how to make pies in the kitchen. Albert and Mr. Kent often peered out the windows at the rear of the house to check on the stable and the horses. We could hear their whinnies and hope they were safe and dry in their stalls. As the storm grew in intensity, we decided to eat dinner in the dining room, master and workers alike. It felt safe there, with a fire burning in the fireplace and hot food on the table. We moved breakfast there for all on the third morning. Mr. Kent and Albert shared stories from history about great storms that had lasted for weeks and caused a great deal of devastation. We all hoped such would not be repeated this summer. One evening, Mr. Kent set his fork aside and wiped his mouth with a napkin. My grandfather used to speak of a great storm of the 1600s that had balls of lightning. A church was struck by the lightning, and legends started of the storm being sent by the devil. Thea scolded her father. "Oh, Papa, you're making up stories." "Oh, that is what Grandpa Kent said. The devil had made a pact with some men who were playing cards, and the church was struck by lightning right during services." "I'm right, am I not, Albert?" "Well, yes, sir. And there was a second great storm around 1703 that lasted for more than a week. Over 1,500 Navy men were drowned." "Will we drown?" worried Thea. "Oh, no, my darling. Those men lived on ships on the sea and were not anywhere near the ocean waters." "Well, I'm scared. May I sleep in your room tonight, please?" Before her father could reply, Esther spoke up. Esther's her maidservant. "I will move into Thea's room for the remainder of the storm, if you like." She directed her comments to Mr. Kent. He bit his lip before turning to his daughter, but she nodded in agreement. After dinner, I helped Esther move several items into Thea's bedroom. It made me long to have someone with me at night until the storm was over. I found Mama washing dishes in the kitchen, and she seemed to read my thoughts. "Rosalie, would you be willing to move into my bedroom for the next few nights? My room is large, and it feels rather lonely, lying there alone and listening to the wind and rain outside." "What a wonderful idea. I will gather my things now and then come and help you finish cleaning up." Even Mr. Kent chose to move downstairs to sleep. He wished to be close to both the front and back doors in case he was needed outside. He could have used a small spare room off the staircase, but did not wish to make extra work by asking someone to prepare the little used room. Instead, he slept on the sofa in the library. All he needed was for Albert to build a fire in the fireplace. The storm seemed never-ending. On day 6, the thunder and lightning crashed without let-up. The sky was filled with great shafts of fire streaking down to the ground and lighting up everything. Mr. Kent and Albert threw open the door and raced toward the stable. Mama, Esther, Thea, and I followed close behind, carrying all the coats within reach. Mr. Kent's voice rose above the storm. "Albert, run and fetch Gary. We will dip them in water at the well, then throw them over the carriages. Please hurry. Rose, you run around to the back of the barn and throw open the doors for the horses. They'll know what to do, so stay out of the way. They will run." I followed Mr. Kent to the well and handed him the buckets which stood nearby. When Albert returned with the bedding, Mr. Kent, drenched them with water, and both men dashed to the barn. I ran around back to help Mama. I could see she was in a great deal of pain. When she had grabbed the metal bar to slide it open, she had no idea the fire had already reached the door. Her hands burnt. She continued to pull open the double doors so the horses could escape the flames. We chased them out the back of the stable, shaking our coats in the air to urge them forward until all the horses had run to the safety of the woods. The men worked in desperation to save the carriages. Soon Brisbane and Abel came crashing through the woods from Colonel Wright's estate to help. They had seen flames and then the horses running scared. All who could ran between the well and the stable with buckets of water over and over again. Esther stood with Thea's face buried against her shoulder so she would not see the horror occurring. When the fire was out at last, Brisbane and Abel went to round up the missing horses. There was nothing left of the stable but ashes and the remains of what used to be saddles. Albert had managed to save just one carriage. Mr. Kent had pulled out a second one with only minor burn damages. The loss of the carriages was heartbreaking to him, as most had belonged to his grandfather and great-grandfather before him. He dropped onto the ground with rain and hail pelting all around him, his hands gripping the sides of his head. His shoulders drooped and began to shake without control. Albert ran to his side, urging him to come inside the house, but he would not budge. Mama and I ran to him as well. Even Esther and Thea could not move him. It wasn't until he spied Mama's burnt hands that he jumped to his feet. "Rose, oh my, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I should never have let you and Rosalie meet a fire. Let's get you in the house and tend to those hands. Esther, fetch some clean clothes, please. Rosalie, can you bring me a basin of cool water? And Albert, crack some eggs and put the whites in a small bowl and bring those here, please." Mr. Kent dipped the cloth into cool water and dabbed the burns with tenderness. I cradled Mama's head against my body, hoping to lessen her pain. Once the wounds had been cleaned, a layer of egg whites was applied over the damaged skin as protection. When the egg whites had dried, soft bandages were wrapped around each hand. Esther brought Mama some water, and I lifted a cup to her lips. Thea looked puzzled. Papa, why did you put eggs on little Rose's mother? He sat Thea on his knee. The egg whites will dry over the burns and make a kind of skin until the new skin begins to grow and heal. Plus, they help keep the wounds clean. Mama raised her head. Thank you, everyone, especially you, sir. Her voice shook. She stared at Mr. Kent for several moments, perhaps appreciating his great kindness towards her at a time when he was the one hurting most. The pain over the loss of his carriages appeared to have faded away for now. His concern for Mama had taken its place. The storm lasted for 3 more days. The thunder and lightning had completed their reign of terror. All that continued was wind, rain, and hail. One good thing from all the rain was there was no danger from the ashes where the stable once stood, bursting back into flames. Colonel Wright agreed to board the horses in his stable until such time as Mr. Kent should decide to rebuild here at Weymouth House. We all babied Mama as much as she would allow. We took turns cleaning her burns and applying fresh bandages to her hands every day. I was happy to care for Mama. The more she healed, the stronger Mr. Kent became. I sensed a connection growing between them. As soon as possible, he would go to the nearby lumber mill and order materials to build a new stable. This one would be built on the opposite side of the yard where Thea's birthday party had been held. It would have stalls for the 6 horses and 2 great rooms for carriages. Even though only 2 carriages remain, Mr. Kent wanted room for many more. I'll stand there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that glimpse into a literal barn burner. I clearly just, and it also makes our weather seem mild by comparison. So it's all relative. I'd like to mention the annual events that the Friends of the Chicago Writers Center sponsors. Even though they're all in the past for this season, they're in the future for next season. Back in mid-July, we sponsored the Authors Alliance Book Fair, where 20 Chicagoan authors sold their books on Vester Plaza. We will repeat that once again, probably in mid-July. So if you are an author, you can go to our webpage, dhq.org/FCWC. And if you scroll down, you'll find a way to apply to be part of the book fair. If you're a reader, just be sure to scroll by. The annual writing contest closed back, on the second. Our award ceremony was August 16th. If you want to see the ceremony and hear some of the winning works, go to our YouTube channel, Friends of the Chicago Writers Center channel. Be sure to put in the word channel, and you can find all sorts of things, including the contest winning ceremony. The winners, the manuscripts of the winners are available through the library, not for checking out, literally taking out, but you can check them out as in reading them, okay? On August 20th, Thursday, in the Hall of Philosophy, we had 18 selected Chicagoans read their favorite poem as part of the tradition started by poet laureate, then poet laureate Robert Pinsky, literally 18 years ago. About 100 people gathered to listen to those poems. And once again, either you can go to our webpage and we posted a link to those readings, or you can seek out the Friends of the Chicago Writers Center channel on YouTube and find that. Just a reminder, we'll have time for a brief Q&A and a couple of the authors have books for sale. But now it's time for our second reader, Syd Goldsmith. Syd's first novel, Jade the Phoenix, was a finalist in the Faulkner and New Voices in Literature competitions. The title of his second novel, Two Musicians and the Life We Live In, speaks to its subject. That's it. His Hong Kong on the Brink is a memoir of his experiences as an American diplomat in the Cultural Revolution riots there. Syd credits the Writers' Center with much of what he has learned during his 26 summers at Chautauqua. He lives with his wife Lillian in Taipei, Taiwan, and two of his four children have also made their lives there. He is here now, though, with us at Chautauqua, Syd Goldsmith.
Yeah.
Can you hear me back there? Good. Quick introduction. I never dreamed of becoming a writer. I am slow, I'm lazy. It's been 9 years since my last published book. Didn't know what to write, but I didn't want to write something that required me to do a lot of research in Chinese. How many of you might have read James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a young man? Can't get into a discussion here of whether you loved it or hated it, but it inspired me in my consistent hubris. It says, I can try that. Well, that's fine, but Philip Roth quit writing 8 years earlier that I put together this first draft now. And the only reason I could do it is I hired a ghostwriter. So I'm still fussing about whether I should include my discussion on hiring a ghostwriter in this book, but I'll read it to you. So it's me and the ghostwriter. Ghostwriter speaks first. He says, "You are freaking crazy to want me to ghostwrite your memoir. We haven't even been in touch for 50 years. I can't think of anybody less qualified to find the truth from your fantasy. You don't even know my pen name. It's Nick Woodley, but since you've never read any of my books, you wouldn't know that my A to C detective series is known by the dirty words beginning with those letters, like the second novel in the series is called Bitch." Syd Goldsmith showed up out of nowhere, claiming to be my closest childhood friend back in the 1950s. He tracked me down and came halfway across the world to sit in the sanctuary of my paradise in the Massachusetts woods and hire me to write his life story. I wasn't even sure that I wanted to let him in, but I summoned him to sit on the chair with the cracked bamboo seats while I took to my leather and sponge settee. I wouldn't have recognized this person on the street. He had a full head of hair, which boasted some fresh black streaks that looked like some beauty parlor got to it. He insisted they were recent natural growth his doctor couldn't explain. I scratched my bald head, but didn't ask how he managed this in his smooth-skinned face. It looked like he was scrutinizing my wrinkled leather puss as if I was going to die soon. I wondered if he was going to ask if he could help replace some of my ancient cabin's rotting wood. He'd never understand that it tells me how to write, not his story. I asked him, "How could you dream of me writing your memoir when I have no idea who you are? No news clips, nothing famous about you. I did learn that all three of your books didn't sell enough to pay the rent. My scraggly white beard bristled. That's me. My too small neck bobbed like a pigeon pecking in the park. Most likely, it's Parkinson's. I told him I'm not deaf and I'll be damned if I can research my own life. Philip Roth quit writing when he was 80. I've had enough frenetic adjectives and miserable metaphors that don't sell. And the last thing I want to do is create a piece of, like James Joyce's oblique half memoir, posing as a portrait of the artist as a young man. How dare this stranger demand that I write his life story? I asked him, how idiotic can you be? I was only half grateful that the accidental spittle missed his face. You're a writer, you can write your own memoir. Why torture me with it? I can understand some of Syd's desire not to attempt this at his age. That's what the market's been telling him for the last 25 years. I understand that. It wasn't until I was past 70 that I finally got one of my books on the Times bestseller list. What I wasn't going to tell Syd was that the only way that book got there for all of 2 weeks was to buy a couple thousand copies from my agent to give away. So much for my advance. I did tell him the truth. If you want to write it to be a memoir, you've got to write it yourself. This ghost of the past stood up and lost his balance, or was he lunging to choke me? I came to you because you were my best friend. You're the only one alive who knows my childhood. I want to know what formed me, and I've spent years unable to answer that question. You have more than the answers, and you've posted more books than you've written under your own name. Don't tell me that most of them weren't memoirs. I grabbed a bamboo chair and fell into it. Syd's rant was a bit much for me to choke on. We were the closest of childhood's friends, but it was probably because neither of us had any others. We shared aspirations. Mine sure wasn't to make a life as a ghostwriter and tell him that I'll never have enough money to retire. He dreamed of being next Stan the Man Musial, baseball star. But I can't recall whether he even made the high school baseball team. I lit up a cigarette, surprised that I let this conversation go on this long before smoking. No wonder I'm on edge. I didn't spend any of those years envying Syd's life's choices. But now that this ghost shows up and tells me to do his memoir, well, maybe I'm a little jealous. You lived a life, went all around the world, maybe failed everywhere before starting to write your books at 60. All I've done is write about other people's lives. But I'm not hibernating in this cabin as it rots along with my body. There's real life and fake lives. All I've done is create imaginary ones in search of some unknowable truth. Exactly, I said. I have no idea of my own truth. That's why you have to write my memoir. Find some truth in my life and keep me honest. How can I do that? You tell me you couldn't even make a record of what you did in the Foreign Service because everything was confidential. You never kept a diary. What about all those odd jobs you took on in the 35 years you've been sucking off the government pension tip? Why should I remember anything about you as a kid in the 50s when you tell me that anybody who knew anything about you as a kid is either demented or dead? Not that it would be any different if these people were alive. You spent the better half of your life in Taiwan. You want me to write a Chinese memoir? Syd reached for the ashtray on the table that separated us and shoved it in my face as I flicked cigarette ashes on the floor. Can you put out that cigarette and listen to me? He shouted. I'll tell you what to write. The tiny cabin of rotted wood, surrounded by overgrown grass that protected and imprisoned me, would not hold both of us much longer. I confessed that we were childhood friends and I needed the work. He admitted that he had always been an easy way out bastard, comfortable on a government pension, forever an expatriate. He says he craved status among foreigners and feared competition and hostility from his own. Close to tears, he said, I'm so inconsequential that you have to dig up decent material to chronicle my life. I lived in other people's places. Make it worth reading. We stared at each other for a long while. I couldn't understand why Syd's face was pretty smooth still. He looked 20 years younger while I stroked my hardened wrinkles and felt like death warmed over. I knew Syd wouldn't leave until he got what he wanted. He was just like the Chinese negotiators when he was making Nikes for a Taiwan company soon after he retired from the Foreign Service. He's been in Asia since his 20s. That led me to insist that if I were going to do anything with his life, only his early years would be subject to examination. Syd would have to agree that I could write what I damn well pleased about this once closest friend who disappeared before either of us had any idea what we were losing. No doubt, Syd Goldsmith radiated triumph when I, ghostwriter Nick Woodley, whispered that I would write up that much for a lot less than I should be paid for it. Do I still have a little time?
You have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. I'll be happy to open it to questions, if anybody has any. Well, if not, I've got a little less than 3 minutes and I'll use it. Here's another introduction, and this one is to two musicians and the wife who isn't. And of the two musicians, one is me and the other is female, who introduces this book. I really should have left the lace panties hanging on the front doorknob for Michel to stick his nose into when he gets home, but I need them more than him. I'm a classical guitarist and my John Carlos Moran goes everywhere. He made it from my hands when I was studying with Segovia in Spain, and I'm never without it. He loved me too. He said, Sally Pendergast is the best guitar talent of this generation. That's me. My soon-to-be ex-husband was the first American violinist to win a medal in the Tchaikovsky competition. He used to carry the guitar for me sometimes, but ever since he changed his name from Michael Schwartz, he's just bitched about getting it from the house to the car. I still can't figure out why it took more than a year, but I told him to fuck off and stop telling me it is an illegitimate instrument. I saved my right hand for that guitar. The left hand holds everything else I own as I walk out on Michel. It's all stuffed into the double bag. Purple concert dress and heels, a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, decent skirt and blouse, And don't forget the lingerie. The bra size I need for my petite frame is impossible to find. Whenever I lean forward or take a deep breath, and drool. There's also the pair of sneakers I grabbed from the closet on the way out because the heels are coming off my boots. Had to take the makeup kit I hate, but I'll need it if I ever get a TV gig. The framed picture of me and Segovia playing duos and Seville goes everywhere too. Michelle did the best to drown me out. That's the next closest thing to forcible rape. Outside of domestic labor, all they ever wanted off of me was to get inside those panties. I was always generous about that, but can't afford a new pair now. I pulled them off the doorknob and jammed them into a side pocket. Michelle will have to make do without. No man will carry my baggage, so I travel real light. Hope I made it on time. Thank you all for listening. Great to see you.
Two very provocative. I'd like to remind you of a few other literary events this week before we get to our third reader. Tomorrow at 12:15, I believe it's in the ballroom this week. Summer on the Steps presents a CLSC Unbound book discussion, meaning they're discussing a book that's not on the CLSC official list, but it is by Jim Han, who is the prose writer of the week. It's her book, Perhaps I Found You. Tomorrow on Vester Plaza, the young readers have sort of a activity related to the two books of the week. Theresa Rodriguez's Where They Gather, and Cynthia Laypick-Smith, well, she's the editor of the legendary Fried Bread Drive-In. On 12:15, or at 12:15 rather, on Friday, on this porch, weather permitting, the community reading will feature spotlight readers from the prose and poetry writers center workshops of the week, plus the unveiling of the community poem. Remember, you have until 5 o'clock Thursday to go to poetry.ch2.org to find out more and contribute your own lines to the prompt of the week. The central part of the prompt, there's more detail on the website, is to use the phrase, "we the people," and then talk about the importance of gathering. And a final event reminder for this week, the CLSC Author of the Week is no longer on Thursdays. You may have caught on by now. I hope you have, or you've been sitting through the wrong lecture for finding no one there. 2 o'clock Friday, all of philosophy. Kelly Link will be there speaking about White Cat, Black Dog story. Our final reader today is David Walsh. He spent his career in public service, starting in local government in his native Shenango County, and specializing in information management and technology in state government. One of his goals has been to bring poetry to the workplace. He frequently reads poetry to lead off a meeting or presentation. He has been greatly influenced by poetry workshops at the Chicago Institution. His poetry has been published in Museum of Americana, 9, Spitball, Highbone Today, the Manhattansville Review, and Rybak Review, from Whispers to Roars to Twin Bill and the Streets of Saranac Lake. David Walsh.
Thank you, Fred. I think for two things. One, get people together, all of us, to share, and the other is for bringing the sun. Give you credit for that.
Oh, thank you.
I frequently get asked, as most writers do, where do your story hero poems come from? And my first answer, at least for today, is I just look out my window. And that's where this poem came from. It's poem. I am not the tree. The maple has been stormed from a crane, broken into pieces, dropped without ceremony on my neighbor's front lawn. Chainsaws are merciless cutters, shredding rings to leave age uncounted, years of growth unmarked, future unmet. I am not this tree. The oak grew close to the house, worn arms pushed holes in its shelter. A chipper sounds like a machine gun, limbs torn from limbs laying in its path, pulled into the line of fire. Wood mulch results from the battle. Acorns scatter and rattle shingles with every shake of the rope that pulls down the trunks. Leaves fly from the scene, lost in the noise. I am not the trees. It takes 4 trucks to dismantle 70 years of life, dust to dust. So another source for writing anything really, but poetry especially, is my childhood. There are stories that pile up, and some of them end up being true and some of them end up being myths, but they still can serve as fodder for the pen. This one is called Grave. Fields flank the cemetery. One side a baseball diamond, the other winter's sledding hill. For childhood friends and I, daytime footpaths through gravestones are nothing more than part of the streets. A park lined with stones in symmetrical order, meandering offline only when the rows shift to accommodate the hill. Landscape as rural architecture, stone slabs punctuated with few small flags and flowered urns. A body's length of grass measures the distance between rows, each stone marked with alpha and omega, a life buried in the dash between dates. Our playground could still release ghosted dread in preteen boys. Fears rise higher as an afternoon adventure fades into dusk with its wide shadows. On a midsummer night, we camp in center field, confident in the distance to the nearest grave. Our conversation veers into conjecture. Did any neighbor take up silent residence due to violent acts? Did a bloody knife lay with its fated owner underground? Is the backhoe a suspicious shadow of death? At any unexplained noise, we hold our breath and somehow avoid a wet sleeping bag. We run the short distance home when darkness is too much of a spiritual workout, sleep impossible by 2 a.m. This poem I titled Where I Learned My Vocation, but I think it's more summed up by the first line, so I'll start over. Where I learned my vocation. I work hard to keep baseball out of my poems. Sounds creep into my writing space. A radio voice through the screen door, the plaintive call of an 8-year-old screaming that he was safe, the sharp sound of cracked wood. A stadium filled with 40,000 fans is bound to include at least 900 poets, yearning to turn the game into a handful of haiku, pretending to describe a 4-6-3 double play into a 5-7-5 inning-ending third out. I vow not to be one of them. Speed, motion, hits, and runs follow me home with today's lesson written in my program. A win for one side, denial for the other. The next poem kind of reflects a couple of things at once. One is when you end up in a career where you commute 25 miles every day, 50 really, not than that. You see a lot of things on the roads, you see a lot of activity with drivers, and you wonder how it all happens and doesn't happen. And sometimes this poem became a mix between those kind of actions and God's divine providence. It's called Road Grace. I ran the stoplight and felt chased. Since bad consequences are the domain of better angels who fend off evil counterparts to squash my guilt. I claim divine intervention via prayer. If talking aloud behind the wheel is considered conversation with a God who protects me from bent metal. Rules of the road are daily broken, but I grade myself on a curve based on some sense of ethical behavior gleaned from my upbringing. God may not care about my drifting attention in the shadow of a traffic light, so long as I mutter the Beatitudes while ignoring the eternal grace of green. Here.